The dog hit the door before anyone else moved, not the handlers, not the security detail that had been standing at the end of the hallway for the last 4 minutes, pretending they weren't watching. Not the two corpsmen who'd wheeled the gurney in and then backed against the wall like they were trying to become part of it. The dog moved first, a Belgian Malinois named Sentry, 72 pounds of muscle and training and something else that didn't have a name, and he planted himself between the gurney and the rest of the world, and he did not move again. Nurse Vera Callum had seen a lot of things come through the trauma bay doors at Fort Halstead Regional Medical Center. She'd seen men without legs who were still trying to give orders. She'd seen a kid, 19 years old, holding his own hand because there was no one else there to do it. She'd seen the particular kind of quiet that settles over a room when the monitors flatline and everyone already knows there's nothing left to try. She had not seen a military working dog refuse to let a crash cart through. "He won't move," said the handler, a young specialist named Pedig, sweat soaking through the collar of his ACUs. "I've given the command 4 times. He's not responding. What's the command? Out heel. Stand down." Pedig's jaw was tight. Nothing. Vera looked at the dog. Sentry looked back at her. His ears were flat, his body low, his eyes fixed on her face with an intensity she'd only seen in people who had run out of options. The man on the gurney behind him, the one the paperwork called Marcus Webb, but whose dog tags read something she wasn't cleared to see, had a chest wound that was going to kill him in about 11 minutes if no one got to him. His blood pressure was in the basement. His breathing was wrong in a way that made the back of her teeth ache. She did not look away from the dog. She crouched down, slowly, the way she'd learned to do a long time ago, before Fort Halstead, before nursing school, before the part of her life she didn't talk about in break rooms or on first dates. She put her hands on her knees, palms up. Sentry's growl dropped half a register. "Hey," she said. "Quiet. Not soft, there was a difference. Soft was for people who wanted to be comforted. Quiet was for people who needed to be heard. I know. I'm going to help him, okay? That's all I'm doing." The dog looked at her hands. She turned her left wrist over. It was an old tattoo. She'd gotten it at 22 in a place she couldn't name, from a man who hadn't given her his real name either. 3 lines in a circle, rendered in dark blue, just below the inside of her wrist. It had faded some. She'd almost had it removed, twice. Both times something had stopped her, and she'd never been sure if that was sentiment or instinct, or just the particular stubbornness that had gotten her through everything else. Sentry went still. Not relaxed, still. The way a wire goes, still after the current stops. He leaned forward, slowly, and pressed his nose to her wrist, held it there for 3 seconds. Then he stepped to the side. "Go," Vera said, and the crash cart came through. She didn't think about it again until after. There was too much to think about during. The chest tube, the blood pressure that kept crashing and coming back like it was deciding something, the attending who kept second-guessing her catheter placement and was wrong both times. The man on the table had been in surgery for 4 hours. When he came out, he was alive, which was the only thing that mattered, and Vera went and stood in the supply closet for about 2 minutes and let herself feel whatever she was going to feel, and then she washed her face and went back to work. It was 3 in the morning when the men in civilian clothes showed up. There were 2 of them. The first one was broad, mid-40s, with the kind of face that didn't give anything away easily. He introduced himself as Harlan and did not offer a last name or a badge, though she was fairly sure he had both. The second one was younger, late 30s, probably. With tired eyes and a notepad he kept clicking his pen against in a way that would have driven her crazy if she'd had any energy left. "Nurse Callum," said Harlan, "you were the first to approach the patient on arrival. I was the first person Sentry let near the patient." "Yes. Can you tell us how you accomplished that?" Vera looked at him. She had been on shift for 14 hours. She had a stitch in her left shoulder from where she'd wrenched it trying to stabilize the gurney, and she was running on about 40 milligrams of caffeine and sheer unwillingness to be anywhere else. She was not in the mood for whatever this was. "I crouched down and showed him my wrist," she said. "He stood down. I don't know why." "Your wrist." Harlan's eyes moved to it. "The tattoo. I didn't know military working dogs could read." The younger one, he'd said his name was Feld, which she also doubted, made a sound that might have been a laugh. Harlan did not change expression. "That particular dog," he said, "was trained in a specialized program. The recognition protocols are classified, but I can tell you that certain marks, certain symbols, are used in that program as handler identifiers, for trust verification." Vera said nothing. "We need to know," Harlan said, "where you got that tattoo." The supply closet had been cold. The trauma bay had been loud. This room, a small conference room off the main corridor, fluorescent lights, a table with a ring stain from someone's coffee cup, was neither. It was just still, in a way that reminded her of waiting. I got it a long time ago, she said. Where? I don't remember exactly. Nurse Callum. I was 22, she said. I wasn't keeping careful records. Feld clicked his pen. She looked at him and he stopped. Harlan leaned back slightly. Not giving up, recalibrating. She recognized the move. She'd used it herself. The man you helped save tonight, he said, is part of an ongoing operation I'm not able to detail for you. What I can tell you is that someone tried to access his room twice before he went into surgery, someone with credentials that should not have cleared him past the second checkpoint. The air in the room did something. The hospital has a leak, she said. We believe so, and you're telling me this because Sentry doesn't respond to strangers, Harlan said. He responds to the program. And the only people in the program are people we vetted, which means either there's been a significant breach we don't know about, he paused, or you're not as much of a stranger as your file suggests. Vera looked at the table, at the coffee ring, at the fluorescent hum that was starting to work its way into the base of her skull. What does my file say? She asked. Before Fort Halstead? Certified RN, Johns Hopkins. Before that, University of Maryland. He paused again. Before that, 2 years you haven't accounted for. She'd wondered sometimes if this was how it would surface. Not the past coming back so much as just catching up. The years she'd spent not being a nurse. The tattoo she'd kept for reasons she'd stopped explaining to herself. Those 2 years are mine, she said. Ma'am, I understand. No, Vera said, and something in her voice made Feld stop clicking his pen again. Those years are mine. They're not relevant to what happened tonight, and they're not something I'm going to walk you through in a conference room at 3 in the morning. What I can tell you is that the dog let me through because dogs know things we don't, and the man on that table is alive because I did my job. That's all I have for you. Harlan looked at her for a long moment. All right, he said finally. For now. She stood up, her shoulder pulled. She ignored it. One more thing, he said. She stopped but didn't turn. The person who tried to access the room. We think it may be someone on staff. She stood there for a second. Which department? Nursing. She left without saying anything else, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't change what happened next, and she needed to think clearly before anything happened next. The leak, it turned out, walked with a slight limp. Vera noticed it at the nurse's station at 6:45 in the morning, when the day shift started filtering in, and she was still there because she hadn't left. His name was Kellerman. She didn't know his first name, had never had reason to, and he worked in patient transport. The limp was new. Or not new, but recently worse. She'd seen him without it 2 weeks ago. She watched him badge through a door he didn't need to badge through. Watched the slight hesitation before he punched the code. Watched him glance once, quickly, at the corridor that led toward the ICU where the man from the gurney was now recovering. She called the extension Harlan had left. He answered on the second ring. Kellerman, she said. Patient transport. Blue lanyard. He just badged through the east corridor checkpoint, and he's heading toward ICU. A pause. Stay where you are, Harlan said. She did not stay where she was. She followed at a distance, because she was tired and her shoulder hurt and she had excellent reasons not to get involved. And none of those reasons were enough to make her stop. She'd learned that about herself a long time ago, in those 2 years she wasn't going to discuss in conference rooms. Kellerman stopped outside a supply closet 12 feet from the ICU entrance. He glanced left. He glanced right. He did not glance behind him, which was a mistake she wouldn't have made. He reached for the door handle. Hey, Vera said. He turned. She was standing 6 feet away with her arms at her sides and her badge clipped to her scrubs and her face doing the thing she'd learned to do when she needed to look like she owned whatever room she was in. She wasn't sure if it still worked. She hadn't needed it in a while. Kellerman looked at her. Something moved in his face. Calculation, maybe. Or something older than that. You're not supposed to be back here, he said. Neither are you. He made a move that might have gone somewhere if Sentry hadn't come around the corner at exactly that moment, with Pedig holding his lead and 2 of Harlan's people 2 steps behind. Kellerman stopped. Sentry sat. He sat the way he'd stood before, like a wire after the current stops, and he looked at Kellerman with the particular attention of an animal that had already decided and was simply waiting for the humans to catch up. It's done, Vera said quietly. She wasn't sure who she was saying it to. Harlan found her on a bench outside the main entrance at 8 in the morning, when the light was still low, and the parking lot was doing that thing where it looks almost peaceful if you don't look too hard. He sat down beside her. He didn't say anything for a while, which she appreciated. Kellerman has a brother, he said finally. Overseas. Complicated situation. Someone found the leverage. They always find something. He's talking. We'll get where we need to go. She nodded. Her shoulder ached. She should put ice on it. She wasn't going to. The man in the ICU, she said. He's going to make it? Looks like it. Doc says another hour without the chest tube. He stopped. Yeah, Vera said. The light shifted. A car pulled in, a family getting out, a child running ahead of the adults the way children do when they don't know yet to save their energy. Your tattoo, Harlan said. We're not doing this. I'm not asking you to explain it. He paused. I just want you to know that I ran the symbol against our records. Another pause. It doesn't appear in any current program database. She looked at him. It appears, he said carefully, in a program that was officially closed 11 years ago, a joint training initiative, Navy, some allied units, some civilian contractors, the kind of thing that doesn't come up in standard records searches. He looked at the parking lot, the kind of thing that would explain a dog recognizing a mark that technically doesn't exist anymore. Vera said nothing. Sentry's trainer, Harlan said, came out of that program, the original cohort. He glanced at her. He spoke very highly of a medic he worked with. Young woman, he said. Stubborn as hell. Good under pressure. The child had made it to the entrance and was now holding the door open with the gravity of someone performing an important task. The parents caught up. They went in. He used a word, Harlan said, to describe her. He said she was the kind of person who couldn't not help, even when she should have walked the other direction. Vera looked at her wrist, at the 3 lines in the circle, faded and a little crooked, from a man whose name she'd never known in a place she couldn't name. That's not a compliment, she said. That's a liability. Maybe both. She thought about the supply closet where she'd stood for 2 minutes after, about the way Sentry had pressed his nose to her wrist and held it there, deciding, about a 22-year-old who'd made a choice she didn't fully understand and had never quite been able to take back. He doing okay? She asked. The trainer. Harlan was quiet for a moment, retired, coastal Maine, has a fishing boat and 2 dogs. A pause. I'm told he's fine good, she said. That's good. She stood up. Her shoulder protested. She was going to go home and sleep for approximately 7 hours and then come back and do this again, because that was what you did. You came back. You showed up. That had been true when she was 22, and it was still true now, and she had long since stopped expecting it to become any less exhausting. Nurse Callum, Harlan said. She stopped. For what it's worth, he seemed to choose his next words the way people do when they mean them. He would have died. Without you. Nobody else was getting through that dog. Vera thought about the man on the gurney. About the 11 minutes she'd calculated when Sentry was still blocking the door. About the way she'd turned her wrist over without thinking, the way she always did things without thinking when it mattered. I know, she said. She didn't mean it as pride. She meant it the way you mean anything you carry for a long time. Not as something to display, just as something true. She walked to her car. The morning light was getting stronger. Somewhere inside the building, a dog named Sentry was doing what he'd been trained to do, which was also just what he was. Watching over someone who needed it, patient and certain and unwilling to be moved by anything that didn't earn it. She understood that about him. She'd always understood that about him. She got in her car and sat there for a second, both hands on the wheel, wrist facing up in the light. The tattoo looked exactly the same as it always had. She'd never been able to decide if that meant something or nothing. She decided, for now, that it meant she should go home and sleep. She started the car, and she drove, and the road opened up ahead of her the way roads do in the early morning. Like they haven't decided yet where they're going, like they're still working that part out, and she thought about Maine, and fishing boats, and 2 dogs, and whether any of that was the kind of ending she believed in. She thought, probably yes. She thought, probably that would have to be enough.